Good morning. Thank you for being here with us today, all of you, and online, hello. My name is Helen Antoniou, as was just mentioned. I am the chair of the Board of Governors of Concordia University. For those of you who don't know us, Concordia has the distinction of being the top-ranked university in North America under 50 years old, according to the QS World University Rankings. We are also recognized by the Times Higher Education as one of the most international universities in the world. And we ranked amongst the top 25 universities globally for our work to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals on climate change, reduced inequality, and smart cities and communities. And to prepare for more than 50,000 students for the future economy, Concordia is spearheading the Future Skills Innovation Network, a first-of-its-kind pan-Canadian effort that offers innovative approaches to skills development. And of course, today we are here to talk about the reskilling revolution. I'd like to introduce to you our panelists, our esteemed panelists, who are both here live and online. First, I'd start with Linda Hasenfratz, who's the chair and CEO of Linamar Corporation, a Canadian publicly traded advanced manufacturing company with worldwide operations. And Sean Hinton, to her left, who is the founder and CEO of SkyHive, an end-to-end reskilling platform that optimizes human economies in real time for companies, communities, and countries. Online, I'd like to introduce Jonas Prising. Hello, Jonas, Chairman and CEO of ManpowerGroup, a Fortune 500 professional services firm that provides innovative workforce solutions for customers around the globe. And finally, Naadiya Moosajee, if I'm mispronouncing it, please correct me. Co-founder and CEO of WomHub, a Pan-African incubator, accelerator, and co-working hub for female founders in STEM. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
To kick off the discussion, I'd like to give some elements of context. The OECD estimates that 1.1 billion jobs are liable to be transformed by technologies in the coming decade. Moreover, a recent PwC survey found that 36% of CEOs are focused on improving productivity through technology and automation. At the same time, the International Labour Organization reported that youth labour market participation decreased by 12% between 1999 and 2019. So in light of all this, I'd like to ask each of our panelists from their own perspective, what do you view artificial intelligence and automation as forces that are complementary to or competing with existing workers and those entering the labor market? I'll start with Linda.
Sure. Well, I think they're absolutely complementary to the existing workforce, and in fact, critical, in my opinion, at the moment, because the workforce has shrunk so dramatically, in large part thanks to COVID, but the workforce was already shrinking before that, but it was really accelerated during COVID. So we've got this massive gap between the number of people looking for jobs and the number of jobs that are available. In fact, more than 5 million more jobs available than people looking for jobs. And this is not something that's, going to rectify on its own. I mean, people retired early. In the US, over 1 million people died. Not all of whom were working, but many of whom were working or supporting workers. So this is a permanent change in the workforce. So to me, the only solutions are immigration, automation, and innovation to do things differently, with less people. And of course, artificial intelligence is the key enabler to the automation piece. So I see it as highly complementary. It is something that we've been very actively doing in our facilities for years to grapple with the shrinking workforce and less people wanting to be working on the shop floor in a manufacturing organizations. So it's been a critical part of us being able to continue to thrive and grow as an organization. And I think it'll become even more important going forward for even more businesses.
And as those workers on the shop floor who are seeing their jobs being replaced by automation, how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's not at all their jobs being replaced. In fact, in some cases, it's the only way we can get product out the door because there just isn't enough people. So to me, it is a real positive for our people because it means they have the opportunity to move into a new role.
Yeah.
That is, frankly, more interesting, that has more opportunity, pays better as well. So to me, it's actually quite good for our people, and our people are enjoying the opportunity to step into something different, whether it be programming or troubleshooting or the whole skilled trades and maintenance side of maintaining all of this automation, which is a huge task.
That's great. Thank you, Linda. I'll turn now to Mr. Prising. What about you?
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, and I would wholeheartedly agree with what Linda has just described in terms of the complementarity around technology. I think what's interesting for the audience is to think back about what a conversation around the impact of automation would have sounded like in 2014 and 2015. If you recall, all of the discussion was how automation was going to eliminate jobs. What are people going to do? We need to introduce basic income concepts because there won't be enough jobs. And fast forward to the pandemic and past the pandemic, which really gave us a look into the future of work once the structural trends that we know are really visible, such as demographic changes, which reduces the availability of skills, the technological evolution, which changes the skill sets that are needed on the shop floor, in manufacturing, but in many other areas as well. Individuals making different choices on what they prefer and how they want to engage with work. And last but not least, our companies are organizing themselves in a different way. So it's very clear, based on the data, that it is complementary. Now, what is equally clear, and I know we'll be talking about that in a little moment, is that it drives a need for different skills.
Yeah.
And that is going to be the defining challenge, not technology's availability and complementarity to what and how work gets done, but rather how do we upskill and reskill the workforce at scale so everyone can participate in this evolution and have the more interesting jobs, the better paid jobs that Linda was describing in her business, but generally true for many organizations in whatever industry they're active.
Thank you, Jonas. I turn it now to you, Sean. What's your perspective?
Yeah, so SkyHive has a unique perspective in that it was one of the world's first enterprise-grade artificial intelligence softwares. And so, but SkyHive is a B Corporation, a for-profit social impact organization, and a strong global public proponent of the ethical use of artificial intelligence. And ultimately, we spend all day, every day, helping companies and communities with this question of how I define the future of work, which is the relationship between humanity and machine for the purposes of productivity and growth. And we don't want to restrict this to artificial intelligence. There are technologies that are now following artificial intelligence in quantum computing and nanotechnologies that are going to drastically change the way that industry is operating and labor markets are operating across the world. Where we do have the opportunity is now to be able to see labor economies and workforces at a far more granular level. So instead of just looking at a workforce through the lens of a job or a credential, we're now able to break up those jobs and credentials into their smallest pieces and start to see what we call skill proximity.
Yeah.
So we did some work that's a very public case study where we looked at the consumer retail industry with some large organizations in the World Economic Forum. And going into the work, we looked at frontline consumer workers who were at risk of displacement due to automation. and said, okay, what are the in-demand jobs that are coming in the short-term future within these organizations? And what are the skill sets today of those people who are at risk of displacement? And those organizations had, on average, pegged employees at 11 skills per employee.
Right.
At the end of the process, they had 34.
Right.
So you're talking about a 3x growth in terms of skill proximity pathways that can lend themselves to reskilling within an organization into future jobs that are in demand within these organizations.
Yeah, interesting. It's the one thing that strikes me is that all this makes a lot of sense intellectually, but change is hard. And so I think that even as you make it with your workforce and as you see it, it's the first, I would imagine the first reaction from your people might be fear and concern, and then you have to do a lot of change management to say, you know what, it's an opportunity. So that's an interesting approach, just to cut it up and to see, you know, there's still things that you are multiple skilled, you're not just one thing. Mm-hmm. I turn it to you, Sonia. What is your perspective on this?
It's really been interesting to see, and building on what Linda, Jonas, and Sean have already said. But I always chuckle a little bit when everybody goes, "Oh, the computers are going to come and take our jobs," because actually the news flash is that they took your jobs about 20 years ago, right? If you walk into any manufacturing plant right now, you'll see very few people walking around just managing machinery. And the engineering and tech industry, that's exceptionally prevalent. And so what we need to consider is thinking about, and I think what has happened is that AI and automation has become very much mainstream. And in developing contexts like we have here across our continent and in my country, in South Africa, the ability to be able to automate processes has really become a political issue where, so it's not about efficiency or creating, optimization. It's actually around how do we save jobs in a very much labor-intensive economies, but also, with very young, upwardly mobile migratory populations across our continent, how is it that we're able to kind of reskill, upskill, and make sure that we have almost the ability to leapfrog some of the challenges that the developed North have in terms of technology absorption and innovation. And so we start to think about reskilling in a very, very different approach based on already how we've automated our factories and our processes across the continent. And so you've got a little bit of a double-edged sword here, but around how do you keep jobs in labor-intensive economies, but also how is it that you use the best technologies in almost kind of virgin territories and native markets around how automation and artificial intelligence. And I guess the quick answer, because sorry, engineers, we always have to take the long version to get to a solution. To cover all our bases, safety first. It's and both. It's really and both. And I think it's, of course, complementary, right? But what you're starting to see emerge very, very quickly is whole new job streams that are coming on board so quickly, we just don't have the capacity to be able to train. And I see this in the engineering industry specifically, and we'll talk about it in, later, I guess. But, to be able to actually upskill and train people, the half-life of knowledge has been reduced drastically. So if you want to train an engineer up into AI and automation, it takes 5 years to graduate an engineer through kind of a university kind of process, whereas the half-life of knowledge is 5 years. So by the time they graduate, whatever they've learned in year one is absolutely useless. Yeah. And I think that is going to be the challenge as we go forward.
Yeah, that's a great lead into my next question, which is about training and development. As you all know, a gold standard in higher education and what we do at Concordia University is work-integrated learning, which combines academics with experience in a professional environment. And in parallel, we also see universities offering micro-credentials, which are sometimes stackable, that are short-term and can be very easily industry-specific. Now, Sean, I'll throw this one to you first. What role do you think that higher education should play in this reskilling evolution?
Yeah, so often we look at labor markets and we're just looking at supply and demand. Mm-hmm. And typically it's employer and worker. But the way that I see the world labor markets is think of it like a circle with 4 pieces. Employers drive growth and productivity and therefore demand. Governments then sort of bring that information in. They create policy and economic development incentives. Those flow down into communities through higher learning, training, vocational training, and other types of training. And then workers and learners acquire the skills to sell back to the market. So there is a massive role to play for higher education. And my fear is transparently that higher education is not keeping up with the changes of how fast this wheel is turning. And what's happening, at least in terms of the observations we have, is companies are starting to build their own training to be responsive. So for example, if we take the question of a micro-credential, does the worker learner actually understand what that micro-credential is and how it applies to their job and their ability to earn a higher income? In higher education, we all have the same vernacular. We understand what a micro-credential is, but does the workforce of the future, whether it's an adult learner that's mid-career or a young person, do they actually understand the composition of these micro-credentials and how it actually drives to the job that they're looking for? And so there's a big role to play for higher education, but I fear that discussion and action is not happening quickly enough.
I'll turn it to you, Linda, as Chancellor of Western University. What's your perspective on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think all institutions need to play a role. Higher education, certainly, whether it's university or college, but also I think secondary schools need to change their curriculums. I mean, there's a lot of people who are graduating with very basic skills from high school, and those basically they're unskilled, and unskilled jobs are going away. So that is no longer going to be enough for our young people who are not pursuing secondary, post-secondary education, because not everybody does. They need to gain some skills at the secondary school level. And I think we need to take a page, and I've felt this for a long time, out of how they do things in Europe, where there is more vocational training that happens at the secondary school level, so that you're graduating with some kind of skill, with some kind of area of focus that you can take and go to work or go to higher education and build on it. So, you in high school learn some basic carpentry, and maybe you go to work as a carpenter, or maybe you go to college and become a tradesperson, or maybe you go to university and become an architect. You're never going to regret having that skill, that vocation that you've learned at the high school level, because you can always use it as a building block. And how great to have an architect that knows how to build things. I don't mean that badly if there's any architects out there, but I think they could use a little more of that, So I think and I've always been a huge fan of the combination of formal education and practical, where work integrated learning is an important part of that. And I love the combination of the hands-on practical knowledge with the formal knowledge, and I think it creates better skills all around. And I just think, as we evolve into these new roles and the jobs that are going to be evolving, that are, no more unskilled jobs, we just need to do a lot more earlier and recognize that everybody's got different pathways. Some people are just going to do secondary school, others are going to move on to college, others are going to move on to university. And it's good to have all those different levels and capabilities.
Yeah. Makes sense. Jonas, what about you? How do you see this?
What we see organizations increasingly do is very much aligned with what all of you have said and that Naadiya mentioned earlier. The speed of change in terms of the skills requirements and the capabilities that organizations need means organizations themselves, large organizations by and large, are providing their own reskilling and upskilling programs for their own employees at this point. We've recently done a survey, which we've done over 10 years, and we now see 80% of companies respond that they are investing in training and reskilling their own workforce. They understand the dynamics of the labor market, and they know they need to provide this career path so that the employees they have stay with the right skills. Now, the difficulty, of course, that educational institutions have at whatever level they are is that, it takes time to bring somebody through 9 years or 12 years of schooling. And organizations' ability to accurately predict exactly what skills are going to be needed is not that, does not use that horizon. It's much shorter. And so the idea of integrating, being closer to the real work and having education and work being very closely tied, of course, is very helpful. But I think ultimately, given the environment we're in with an accelerating level of change, is that learning to learn is going to be the best toolkit at whatever level individuals leave education. Because they will be working, today's generations will be working for 55 to 60 years. There's no way that they can acquire the skills coming out of whatever level of schooling they have today that are going to prepare them for what's coming. But if they have a basis of learning and an ability to acquire new skills, soft skills, technical, hard skills, that is going to help them future-proof their eligibility to be able to find and develop their employment opportunity over a very long lifetime in the workforce.
Yes, that's. Do you see, in your experience, do you see enterprises and companies partnering with universities in terms of doing these and speeding up or being more agile in getting this training?
No, they are absolutely partnering with all kinds of educational institutions. And of course, companies such as Sean's providing platforms, both to assess talent and then to develop and pinpoint where the skills could be needed to fill the demand. Today, I think, is what companies are increasingly using. But what's important to say as well is when we measure, and we employ about 500,000 people across the world today, every day, what we now see employers having to react to is candidates that are looking for jobs. They are very clear. Of course, they want the right pay, but they want access to reskilling and upskilling opportunities as a reason to join an organization. And, so individuals are increasingly clear that building that skill set and building that portfolio of skills is going to help them future-proof themselves and their employability. So this is something that organizations are reacting to and will continue to provide with the help of educational institutions, platforms, and the technologies that are evolving.
Yeah, interesting. And that certainly requires a growth mindset, as has been propagated by Carol Dweck from Stanford. Sonia, how do you see this?
It's Naadiya, sorry.
Naadiya, sorry. I'm distracted. I was thinking, go ahead.
No worries. So, and what's interesting and what we're seeing a lot of is, so when you talk about reskilling and upskilling, everybody complained about millennials. Just wait until Gen Zs, you meet them in the workforce because, the World Economic Forum said, you change careers, not jobs 5 times in your life. And I'm meeting Gen Zs in our processes where they're already on their third career shifts, right? And I mean, they're under 30. So, that whole idea of kind of reskilling, upskilling, and really shifting, one day I'm an admin assistant, the next time a graphic designer, in 3 months' time, I'm something completely different. And they're acquiring skills very quickly. What we've seen a lot of is this, and nobody needed a pandemic, I can say that for definite, right? But what it has shown us is that the way in which people learn can be absolutely shifted overnight. And so you're starting to see the higher, the very most prestigious higher learning institutions really struggle to come on board with kind of this new way of learning. And you're starting to see a whole lot of emerging new educational institutions kind of gap learning opportunities where companies don't have the infrastructure to do it themselves, and so they're outsourcing it to very much nimble organizations like mine as well, that has really kind of plugged the gap for the engineering and tech industry, for example, in bringing kind of skills very quickly, upskilling in short bursts, right? So what you're going to start to see in the long term is kind of higher education and learning institutions really focus on skills where there's a high risk to it, that you kind of need the basis, you need the background. So some deep-seated engineering skills, some in the medical industry where there's a lot of risk to life, you actually still need that pathway around robustness, but everything else actually needs nimbleness. And And you'll start to see, the best organizations, whether they are at a corporate level, instituting it within their own companies, or they're partnering with higher learning institutions who have the ability to be nimble and adaptable around changing curriculum as, the industry evolves and what new jobs are coming on board. You start to see kind of winners and losers in that process.
Yeah, interesting. It seems that, however, that there's almost like two, because is there a sacrifice in nimbleness that you lose nuance or that you lose depth? If you're always focusing on the next thing, you spoke of the 30-year-old who's gone to third career. I wonder how deep there's got to be two, I don't know, I wonder if there's two tiers of learning, like there's some things that are basics that we all need.
Yeah, I would say so. We talk about engineering, and the skills that you learn as an engineer are not just how to calculate fluid dynamics, and you're learning critical thinking skills, right? And that is deep, and that can translate across many different things. And you're learning, problem solving skills, and those skills, I think, are part of what needs to be taught to everybody, right? So that we're all learning to think a little bit differently, and therefore can adapt more quickly and be more nimble, right? So those are really essential skills in an environment where there's not unskilled jobs and where things are going to be constantly changing.
Now, speaking of skills, there was a skills survey that was published by the Business Council of Canada in 2016 that found that skilled trades would be really what was going to be in demand in the next 3 years. Now, in 2022, when they redid that survey, it's the skills that were identified were analytics, statistics, and quantitative analysis would be the most in-demand skills. I wonder, Jonas, if you could tell us whether, in your experience, are you finding that, or what are the skills that you would say are the ones that, the most in demand in the coming 3 years?
Well, I would say, Helen, that the skills that are in demand, the kind of service that you're talking about, are always the one in highest demand, but don't necessarily represent the major proportion of the workforce needs. So they are clearly a function of the evolution of technology and the shortage at that level of those skills in terms of absolute numbers. But if you look at the shortage of skilled trades, I'm sure that in Canada as well as elsewhere, as we do our surveys, organizations and employers are really struggling to find individuals with those skill sets today as well as in 2016. And the major driver of that is that the demographics of that part of the workforce is aging rapidly and retiring. So people are leaving the workforce with those skills. And based on our educational paths, not enough young people are coming into the skilled trades. So we would say that we see the evolution change every year. When you make a survey like this, you will get the latest and the greatest hot skills. But I think for the audience, it's really important to know that just because they're hot, it can be a function of the numbers, the absolute numbers, being quite low as a proportion of the workforce. Overall, we think technical capabilities will evolve, but this kind of soft skills, so the ability to collaborate, apply creative thinking, working within a team, having the learnabilities, the desire and curiosity to acquire new skills is what companies are looking for. Companies can provide the technical skills within their own business to many workers, but they need workers that can continue to learn as they move forward. So that's what we're seeing being very important as you assess talent with the help of technology. Are they capable and interested in acquiring new skills during the course of their career?
Yes, thank you. Sean, you have something to add?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. I mean, I think maybe what's missing from this type of analysis is the advancements in technology and Moore's Law. So, for example, we can, at SkyHive, take massive amounts of data, and we've automated it to the point of we have a feature we call Q, like James Bond Q, where you can say how many doctors are in the city of Atlanta. Gives you the information, so we can take a data set and automate the entire thing. In other words, one of the least in-demand skills in my company would be the ability to analyze data. for example, and this is going to be all mainstream across many different types of technologies within a couple of years. So it goes back to that point. Do we invest in 9 to 12 years of training an entire workforce when that's already been automated? The other thing, kind of getting away from just this fixation on technical skills, if I asked everyone in the audience, how many of you that know people under 20 years old, have you asked those, have they come to you and said, I have a burning desire in my career to be a public school teacher, or I have a burning desire in my career to be a social worker? I'm pretty sure nobody's going to raise their hand and say, yeah, I have somebody in my family that this is the career pathway. These are fundamental jobs to the functioning of any economy anywhere in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we lose sight of, and we have a mental health crisis that's booming and exploding. In the United States, personal home care aid is the #1 and #2 top occupations in demand in the United States, and I'm assuming North America. These do not require significant data analyst skills or the ability to code. And we mustn't forget that 85% of the labor economy is not the knowledge, the knowledge workers.
Yeah, no, thank you. I will turn to our engineer, Naadiya. What's your perspective?
And I'm going to agree with Sean here, but and go a step further, because I definitely agree that the care economy becomes very critical, especially in the developing north with aging population. So you see the implications in Japan, and so they're starting to kind of look at robotics more because they don't have younger populations that will kind of look after the older populations. And so the care economy is critical. But what we're also seeing, even within engineering, and it's always been this way, is I always say there's kind of this hierarchy. So for one engineer that you have, you need 10 technicians. For every one technician, you need 10 artisans, right? And as you build the skill level up. And so one of the most critical in-demand skills is actually welding. So marine welders earn probably some of the best, salaries in the world right now, but, higher than any guy in tech, because it's such a scarce skill. And so, there's a massive need to actually, think about like those blue collar jobs that will still be there, that actually computers, automation, and AI can't yet do, because we haven't yet achieved the kind of mechanical robotics capabilities to be able to actually replace them. And I think when we start to think about how is it that we talk about, real jobs, tech has a sexiness to it, but there are some, fundamental jobs that aren't going to change all that much. And to be able to make sure that we have the right skills and the right people for them, it's actually around, that learn, unlearn, relearn piece, but it's also around thinking about what we call the cognitive and behavioral skills of people, which are becoming even more important, because anything can be taught is something that we've learned, in the work that we're doing, right? But you really have to have the aptitude and the aptitude to be able to do so.
Yeah. Thank you, Naadiya. When you're speaking of welders, it reminded me of what you said, Linda, about the need for vocational training or earlier on. So, what do you think? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, skilled trades is still and will only increase in demand, in my opinion, because of the advent of automation that we started talking about earlier. I mean, somebody needs to maintain that.
Yes.
So you need millwrights, you need electricians, so you will need those skilled tradespeople, but you will also need technicians, like automation technicians. Like this is a critical role. You can't get enough of those people because everything is being automated. Somebody needs to set that up. Somebody needs to program it and troubleshoot it and get that working. And then the other jobs that would support. So, programming, tooling development, logistics and supply chain is a huge area. And of course, you need all those complementary areas as well. And I do actually know a 20-year-old who just finished her teaching, and I know a 20-year-old who just finished social work. So I do know a couple anyhow. There's a few of them out there, thank God.
Thank God.
Thank God. But yeah, like we can't forget about all those areas. I mean, we're one, big ecosystem. Like you need the healthcare, you need the teachers, you need social work, you need mental health professionals, and increasingly we're going to need more and more folks in STEM. So, science, technology, trades, engineering, math. These are skills that we really need because so much is evolving from a technology and innovation perspective. So, and again, to learn the skills in those areas, but also the way that you learn and the like I was saying earlier, critical thinking and problem solving and those kind of skills that tend to be taught in STEM. So, I think that's definitely a critical area. It's an area that we as an organization have been for years working to try to encourage more young people into STEM and trades, and particularly underrepresented folks. So women, and looking at different ethnicities. I mean, we need to tap into every pocket of the population. So that's something that we've been very involved in.
Wow, Linda, that's a great segue to my next question, which is about how the skills gap seems to disproportionately impact, in fact, underserved communities. So in a recent round of funding, Canada's Future Skills Centre directed 60% of its envelope towards projects that support greater equity and inclusion in the workforce. Now, I'll turn to Naadiya for this question first. In your opinion, how do we address labour market inequalities and provide equity in reskilling?
It's been interesting because I've been working in the world of kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion before it became a sexy topic. And over the last 17 years, specifically talking about how do we get more women and girls into the engineering and tech industry. And for a long time, it's always been the equity discussion, right? So because it's fair, because women make up 50% of the population. And we haven't had a lot of traction just because it doesn't land, I guess. People just don't believe in fairness fundamentally in the world, and so you start to see gross inequalities, right? And that's the absolute truth. And what we did was, a couple of years ago, we realized that if we actually change the narrative to speak around the power and the dollar value of actually having DEI initiatives, and how actually when you have more women at the engineering design table, for example, you have better product development that speaks to 80%, 50% of the population that controls 80% of the household purchasing power. And so when you start to talk to an industry and you're saying, actually, women, for example, we've almost killed the entire sedan market for an SUV market. And the SUV market has had prolific growth because women are choosing bigger vehicles, because we've always seemed to be carrying so much stuff, including like baggage, like literally and figuratively for everybody. And so, when we start to be able to kill product lines, we've become a very powerful force. And when you don't have that force at your design and engineering table, you're actually going to miss out market opportunities. You're actually going to miss out on revenue and sales and growth from a company perspective. And so therefore, if you want to make more money as a company, hire more women. And when we went in with that narrative, suddenly every executive is like, of course, let's hire that. Let's hire more women. It makes way more sense, right? And I think that's the fundamental changes. Yes, equality is really important, but actually when we start to think about creating better products and services that speak to to a group that contains such a big purchasing power opportunity, we start to see the flip much more quicker than any other thing. So we've tested a whole lot of arguments over the last 17 years, and this one seems to land. And so hopefully we start to see acceleration, specifically in our industries around being able to get more women both at the design table as well as the boardroom tables.
I saw you react from the corner of my eye. I'll turn it to you. Linda, what's your?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a few things. I like to approach it from a few different perspectives, in the sense that, number one, as I mentioned a moment ago, I think to fulfill the needs that we have for the workforce, we need to tap into every corner of the population, right? Yes. So, if we don't have enough women or people from different ethnic minorities, we need to be going after them because we need them in the workforce. So, there's an imperative for the workforce to have them. I think we need to make the case to those young people of why they should study in those areas, that, there's exciting things happening. There's innovation and technology, and, we're solving some of the world's biggest issues, that's what people in STEM and trades are doing. So appeal to them. And then I like Naadiya's comments of appealing to, the businesses as to why diversity is better and gives you better solutions. And there's actually plenty of statistics showing that diverse teams get better results, better financial results, better all results, right? So, I think we can make that argument. And I do think that we're getting traction. Like, if I look at the number of women in all of, science, trades, technology, engineering, math, they're all increasing. On the engineering side, the University of Toronto is 42% women in their engineering program.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fantastic. So, that's incredible progress. And that's just one example. Many universities are, rapidly increasing the number of women and very ethnically diverse as well. We just had convocation at Western over the last month, and I was thrilled to see how many Masters of Engineering graduates were women.
Yeah.
Like at least half.
It's the same.
So it was great to see that. So progress is absolutely happening. We just need to continue to build on that momentum and get the stories out there and, showcase role models. Like, for instance, we started an initiative at Linamar about 5 or 6 years ago, to encourage more women into STEM and trades through the use of role models. Because I think it's a great way to tell the story. You see it, we call it see it, be it, STEM it. And the idea is if you see it, you can be it, right? So you see somebody, you connect with them in some way, you have a common interest, you relate to them, maybe common ethnicity or whatever, and you can see what they're doing in STEM. So we have a website, seeitbeitSTEMit.com, where we have almost 300 role models. Naadiya, we'd like to get you signed up as a role model. And then we actually take 12 of them every year and create a calendar that we put into classrooms so that every month you can meet a new woman in STEM and see what they're doing and learn about different jobs you can do in those areas and get inspired and get connected in some way. So, and I think it's making a difference. We've distributed 70,000 of these calendars over the last 4 years, and
I'm sure it's having an impact. I'm sure it's having an impact. I even see it at Concordia University. A few years ago, the engineering school was renamed for Gina Cody, who's a generous donor. She's an alumni from Iran, and she's made just even that, and her being a proponent of STEM and girls, and it's had an impact. Sorry, I was on a Concordia tangent. Please tell us, Sean. What do you?
Sure. So we work with a lot of governments and partners around the world on this issue of inequality in labor markets. And fundamentally, we believe in the philosophy that reskilling at scale and at pace is only going to be achieved through a combination of art and science. And when we say artists, we mean the practitioners, the teachers, the HR professionals, the coaches, the mentors, the advisors, the community organizations that are actually doing the work of taking someone through a reskilling journey and holding their hand. And then there's the science, which really speaks to the answer to this question, which is democratization of information.
Yeah.
Because we haven't, you had referenced the 2016 report on top skills in demand. It's 2022. A lot's changed since then, and so we now have, with technologies like SkyHive and others, real-time information to be able to say, here are the top 20 skills in demand on the east of the Nile versus the west, or in Germany versus Japan, etc.
In all fairness, I did mention the 2022 results of that same survey.
Yeah, no problem. And so, for example, in Canada right now, today, the shortage of nurses is 249,631 people.
Yeah.
We know where they are. We know what the shortages are. We know what the compensation requirements are.
Wow.
So let's go out and start to look at not just sort of relying on knowledge worker and everybody else, but actually start to tackle the problems of pragmatism at getting people through a reskilling journey, because they're not going to be able to do that themselves.
Yeah. it's very powerful. I mean, the data that you provide and that kind of democratization is very, very powerful. Jonas, I will give you the final word. You can answer this question or give your, we have just a minute left.
Well, I think, as you've heard from all of us on this panel, the importance and then the understanding that it's the right thing to do, that it is, very beneficial for organizations to have a talent pool that is diverse and inclusive, and finally, that it drives economic growth, because we understand that, although we will reach 8 billion as the world's population at the end of the year, at the end of this year, by 2050, we'll peak out at about 10 billion. And, as the global north is already experiencing, population growth is declining. So we need to include every person that we can into the workforce and make sure that everyone has an equitable access to the opportunities that are going to be there.
Yes, and have you seen something really impactful that some of your companies or clients have done to be able to include those? Is there something quick at the end that you want to?
Well, I think a lot of it is around culture and desire really to make the change happen as a strategic initiative. There are many initiatives a company is pursuing, but I think it's only when it gets elevated to a strategic level as a business imperative that you start to very much see the shift that you've heard Linda describe and Sean and Naadiya talk about as well. That's when the needle starts to shift. And organizations that have it as a strategic business imperative are the ones that are making the most progress the fastest.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much to all four of you. Thank you for your participation. Thank you all for your attention. We'll enjoy the rest of the conference. It's the last day, and that concludes it.